The briefing room in the sub-basement of the federal annex smelled like stale ozone and failed intentions. Calder-Ross didn't offer a seat. He simply slid 3 files across the metal table. Each one contained a face, a name, and a final GPS coordinate that ended in the churning grey waters of Gurion Port. "The Hanul Accord doesn't leave bodies for the evening news, Amara," Ross said, his voice a dry rasp. "They leave vacancies. These 3 were the best we had. They didn't just fail, they evaporated." Amara didn't look at the photos. She looked at Ross's hands, steady, cold, and ready to send a 4th person into the meat grinder. She extended her hand, not for the files, but for the mission. When they shook, it wasn't a pact of protection. It was a formal acknowledgement of her upcoming erasure. She was Vesper now. Vesper didn't have a heartbeat. She had a frequency. 48 hours later, the humidity of the federal basement was replaced by the climate-controlled stillness of Glass Heights. The penthouse was a cathedral of marble and silent judgment, overlooking a Seoul that looked like a circuit board of neon gold. Jihoon Vale Park stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette cutting a sharp, lethal line against the city lights. He didn't turn when she entered. He didn't have to. The air in the room seemed to adjust its pressure to accommodate him. "You're late, Miss Kincaid," he said. His voice was like velvet over gravel, smooth but with a hidden edge that could draw blood. "A woman in my position should be expected, never rushed," Amara replied, her voice a perfect silk ribbon. She dropped her designer clutch on the obsidian table, the sound echoing too loudly. Jihoon turned then. He didn't look at her like a man looks at a beautiful woman. He looked at her like a jeweler inspecting a diamond for a fracture. "This isn't a romance, it is a structural necessity. My father's lords require a vision of stability. You are that vision. You will eat when I eat, smile when I speak, and sleep in the room adjacent to mine." Amara stepped into his personal space, close enough to smell the sandalwood and the faint metallic scent of power. She didn't flinch. "Rule 1. I am not a prop, Jihoon. If I'm playing the wife of the Sky Prince, I don't just smile, I command. Rule 2. You never touch me unless there's an audience. And Rule 3? She leaned in, her eyes reflecting the cold lights of the city. "Don't ever mistake my cooperation for loyalty." Jihoon's lips didn't move, but his eyes darkened with a flicker of something that might have been respect, or perhaps just the thrill of a new challenge. "Loyalty is an expensive habit, Amara. I only asked for your performance." "Then let's give them a show," she whispered, already feeling the weight of the wire hidden in her hair, ticking like a countdown. The Gurion port chain didn't look like a crime scene. It looked like the heartbeat of a nation. Thousands of shipping containers were stacked like giant, rusted Lego bricks, humming with the industrial pulse of cranes and heavy diesel. Here, the Hanul Accord didn't deal in back alleys. They dealt in global logistics. "Stay close," Jihoon murmured, his hand settling firmly on the small of Amara's back as they stepped out of the black sedan. The gesture was for the benefit of the 24 men in dark suits, standing like statues along the pier. But the heat of his palm through her silk blouse felt dangerously sincere. The port lord, Elder Min, values tradition. He will look for a weakness in your eyes. Do not give him one. "I don't have weaknesses, Jihoon. I have roles," Amara whispered back, adjusting the strap of her handbag. Inside, nestled against her lipstick, was a short-range sniffer designed to ping the serial numbers of every ghost container within 50 yards. Elder Min was a man carved out of salt and granite. He didn't bow, he simply nodded, his gaze raking over Amara with the cold efficiency of a customs inspector. "The prince brings a flower to a graveyard," Min rasped, his voice competing with the crashing waves. "Is she sturdy enough for the salt air, or will she wilt before the first shipment clears?" Amara stepped forward, breaking the traditional submissive stance of a consort. She looked Min directly in the eye, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "The salt only preserves what's worth keeping, Elder. I'm more interested in what's inside the crates that don't show up on the manifest." Min's eyes narrowed, then he let out a dry, hacking laugh. "She has teeth." As they moved through the labyrinth of steel, a sudden disturbance broke the industrial rhythm. A dock worker had been pulled from a line, his face a mask of grey terror. He was surrounded by 4 men in grey overcoats, the silent hand. There were no shouts, no dramatic displays of weaponry. They simply closed in like a shadow, their movements synchronized and clinical. The worker began to plead, his voice a frantic whisper, but the silent hand didn't react. One operative placed a hand on the man's shoulder, a gesture that looked almost like a comforting embrace from a distance. A sharp, muffled metallic click echoed against the shipping crates. The worker went limp, not falling, but being steered toward an open container as if he were merely a piece of broken machinery being returned to the factory. Amara's pulse spiked, a cold jolt of adrenaline hitting her system. She started to turn, her training screaming at her to intervene, but Ji-hoon's hand tightened on her waist, anchoring her. He didn't look at the container. He didn't even blink. "Look at me, Amara," he commanded softly, his voice a low vibration that pulled her back from the edge of the abyss. "In this city, the things that disappear were never there to begin with. Remember the role." She forced herself to meet his gaze. For the first time, she saw the sheer weight of the crown he wore, a burden of silence that required him to watch his own world erase itself. The ghost container was sealed with a heavy thud, and just like that, the man was gone. The penthouse was a vacuum of silence that the city's neon pulse couldn't penetrate. Back from the salt and screams of the port, the air felt too thin, too clean. Amara stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of the glass heights, her reflection ghosting over the skyline. She began the ritual of unmaking herself, unclasping the heavy diamond necklace that felt more like a collar, dropping the facade of the doting fiancé inch by agonizing inch. Ji-hoon was at the bar, the amber liquid in his glass the only warmth in the room. He had discarded his jacket, his white sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with tension and a small faded scar near his wrist that she hadn't noticed before. "You're shaking," he said, not looking up. "I watched a man get deleted today, Ji-hoon." "Forgive me if my performance is lagging," she replied, her voice brittle. She turned to face him, expecting the cold mask of the Sky Prince. Instead, she found him staring at the scar on his arm. "That mark is from when I was 12, he said quietly. "A gift from a tutor who thought I wasn't learning the ledger fast enough. I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to build things that people lived in, not things they hid in." He finally looked at her, and for a second, the predator was gone. There was only a hollowed-out boy behind those dark eyes. "I didn't choose the accord, Amara. I was born into a coffin, and every year they just add more silk lining." Amara felt a dangerous shift in the room's gravity. Her mission was to map his empire, but she was starting to map the fractures in his soul instead. "You have the power. You could walk away." Ji-hoon let out a short, hollow laugh and stepped toward her. The distance between them evaporated until she could smell the whiskey and the crushing weight of his reality. Walk away to where? The accord is a circle. There is no outside. There is only the throne or the container you saw today. He reached out, his thumb hovering just inches from her cheek, hesitating. We are the same, you and I. Two people standing in front of a mirror, pretending we don't hate the reflection. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs, not with the rush of the hunt, but with the terrifying ache of recognition. She was a Fed playing a mobster. He was a mobster playing a prince. Both were ghosts haunting their own lives. For a heartbeat, she wanted to tell him her real name. She wanted to tell him that she was the one holding the match that would burn his coffin to the ground. Instead, she remained silent, a prisoner of the mask she had spent a lifetime perfecting. The restaurant was a brutalist slab of concrete and glass tucked away in the neon quarter, a place where the elite dined on secrets while the world outside blurred into a smear of electric violet. Dae-jin Rourke, the iron broker, didn't believe in the quiet elegance of the Hanyul Accord. He believed in the theatre of intimidation. He sat at the head of a long obsidian table, his smile as sharp and artificial as a razor's edge. "Ji-hoon," Dae-jin boomed, his voice a jarring contrast to the low hum of the air conditioning. "And the mysterious Miss Kincaid. You've kept her tucked away like a prize horse. I began to wonder if she actually existed." The dinner was a minefield disguised as a feast. While Ji-hoon navigated the conversational barbs with the poise of a seasoned diplomat, Amara felt the weight of the tactical transmitter strapped to her inner thigh. It was a cold, hard lump against her skin, a tether to a world that was currently listening to every clink of her silver fork. Dae-jin's eyes never left her. He was a predator who didn't hunt for hunger, but for sport. "You have an interesting carriage, Amara. Very disciplined. You move like someone used to carrying weight. Body armor, perhaps. Or just the weight of a guilty conscience." The table went still. Ji-hoon's hand tightened on his wineglass, the stem groaning under the pressure. "Dae-jin," he warned, his voice a low, dangerous velvet. "Just a jest, Prince," Dae-jin laughed, though his eyes remained frozen. He stood up, rounding the table with a predatory grace. "But tell me, Amara, why is it that a woman of your standing has no digital footprint before 6 months ago? It's as if you materialized out of thin air." He stopped behind her chair, his hand hovering near her shoulder. Amara felt the air grow heavy. She knew the broker's reputation. He was famous for accidental spills that required a guest to remove a jacket or reveal what was hidden beneath a hem. As he reached for a bottle of vintage red, his sleeve caught the edge of her water glass, tilting it directly toward her lap. It was a clumsy move for a man so calculated, a deliberate play to force her to stand, to shift, to reveal the silhouette of the gear beneath her silk slipdress. Amara didn't move. She didn't flinch as the ice-cold water soaked into the fabric. Instead, she caught the glass before it hit the table, her fingers locking onto Dae-jin's wrist with a grip that was entirely too fast for a socialite. "I didn't materialize, Mr. Rourke," she said, her voice dropping to a predatory purr that matched his own. "I was just waiting for a room worth entering. And as for my footprint, I prefer to leave impressions, not trails." She let go of his wrist, leaving faint red marks on his skin. Ji-hoon watched her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes burned with a mixture of alarm and something that looked suspiciously like pride. The exposure had been inches away, a heartbeat from a bloodbath, but for now the mask held. The heartbeat of the Hanula chord lived in a room that didn't exist on any blueprint. Deep within the sublevels of the glass heights, Amara moved through the server hub, the Black Ledger, where the Empire's breath was recorded in lines of glowing green code. It was a digital necropolis of bribe structures, laundering routes, and the names of every politician on the payroll. This was the mission. This was the kill shot. Her fingers danced over the terminal, a high-speed drive drinking in the data. Beside her, a man named Min Ho, a mid-level technician who had been the Fed's silent eyes inside for 2 years, watched the door. His hands were shaking. He was the one who had cracked the final firewall for her, risking the silent hand to give her this window. "Hurry," Minho whispered, his voice cracking. "If the iron broker's sweep hits this floor, we're both cargo." 30 seconds, Amara replied, her eyes fixed on the progress bar. The heavy steel door hissed open. Amara didn't jump. She transitioned. In a heartbeat, the federal operative vanished, replaced by the panicked, indignant fiancé of the Sky Prince. Ji-hoon walked in, flanked by 2 silent hand operatives. His face was a mask of cold fury, but his eyes searched hers for a lie he hoped he wouldn't find. "Daejin told me someone was accessing the secure lines," Ji-hoon said, his voice a low, vibrating threat. "I didn't want to believe it was my own house." The operatives moved toward Min Ho. The technician looked at Amara, his eyes wide with a silent plea for protection. Amara felt the cold weight of the drive in her palm. If she defended him, she was exposed. The mission would die, and she would be in a container by dawn. To stay inside, she had to become the monster she was sent to destroy. "I caught him, Ji-hoon," Amara said, her voice trembling with a fabricated, brittle terror. She stepped toward the prince, pointing a manicured finger at the trembling technician. "I came down here to find you, and I saw him. He was trying to delete the port logs. He threatened me." Min-ho's face went white. "Amara? What are you?" The operatives didn't let him finish. They moved with the clinical efficiency she had seen at the port. One strike to the throat to kill the sound, another to the spine to kill the movement. Ji-hoon didn't look at the technician. He looked only at Amara, studying the way her chest heaved with fear. "Get her upstairs," Ji-hoon commanded his men, his voice sounding like it was coming from the bottom of a well. He stepped closer, his hand gripping her arm with a force that would leave bruises. "You shouldn't have seen this. You shouldn't be here." As they led her away, she heard the wet thud of a body hitting the floor behind her. She had saved the ledger, but she had murdered the only other light in the room. She was deeper inside now than she had ever been, and the darkness was starting to feel like home. The gala season in Seoul began with a private reception at a hilltop estate that overlooked the city like a throne. The air was crisp, smelling of pine and expensive gin. Amara wore a gown of midnight silk, its hem hiding the bruise on her arm where Ji-hoon had gripped her in the server room. They moved through the crowd like twin stars, a display of absolute unity. But beneath the surface, the ledger's data was burning a hole in her mind. Ji-hoon was unusually silent. He stood on the terrace, his gaze fixed on the flickering lights of the Mirai Strip. He looked like a man who knew he was being watched by his own ghosts. "Daejin is moving his pieces," he said, his voice barely audible over the low hum of the string quartet inside. "The Iron Broker doesn't believe in the succession. He believes in the void." "Then don't give him one," Amara replied, stepping beside him. The first shot didn't sound like a gunshot. It sounded like the snap of a dry twig. But Amara's training reacted before her brain could process the sound. She saw the glint of moonlight on a barrel in the tree line 300 yards out. The mission dictated she should take cover. The protocol said that if the target was neutralized by a third party, she should use the chaos to extract. But as the second spark bloomed in the dark, she didn't run. She lunged. She tackled Ji-hoon, the force of her body slamming him into the stone floor of the terrace, just as a high-velocity round shattered the glass door where his head had been a second before. Shards of crystal rained down on them like frozen tears. "Down! Stay down!" she hissed, her voice stripped of its silk, replaced by the jagged authority of a field commander. Before the silent hand could even draw their weapons, Amara was moving. She didn't think about the ledger, the feds, or the mask. She reached into the folds of her gown, pulling a compact, high-tensile wire from her garter, not a weapon of the state, but a tool of survival. She shielded Ji-hoon's body with her own, her eyes scanning the perimeter with a lethal, predatory focus that no socialite could ever possess. The shooters realized the window had closed and vanished into the shadows of the estate. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. Ji-hoon lay beneath her, his heart hammering against her ribs. He looked up at her, his face inches from hers. He didn't look at the shattered glass or the dark woods. He looked at the way she held herself, the way her hands were steady, her eyes cold, and her protective stance absolute. "That wasn't part of the contract, Amara," he whispered, his voice thick with a sudden, terrifying realization. She realized then that she was still holding him, her fingers tangled in his shirt, her body a shield. She had saved him by instinct, not as an asset, but as a man. The Fed had disappeared, and for one heartbeat, only the woman remained. "The contract is for a wife," she lied, though her voice wavered. "A widow is bad for the brand." Ji-hoon reached up, his fingers brushing a stray shard of glass from her hair. His touch was soft, aching, and more dangerous than any bullet. He knew. He didn't know who she was, but he knew she was a lie. The penthouse felt like the inside of a clock, every second ticking toward a midnight that would shatter the world. In the quiet of the master suite, Amara tapped a final sequence into a burner phone, a signal to Calder Ross and task group Vesper. The raid was set. In 12 hours, the Hanul Gala would become a killing floor for the Accord's legacy. She turned as the heavy door groaned open. Ji-hoon stood there, still wearing the shadows of the estate shooting. He looked exhausted, the sharp lines of his face softened by the dim amber light of the room. He didn't speak. He simply walked toward her, holding a small box of carved jade. "My mother wore this the night she was inducted into the Accord," he said, his voice a low melodic ache. He opened the box to reveal a pendant, a teardrop of raw emerald held in a web of white gold. She hated it. She said it was a weight disguised as a gift. But she wore it because it meant she was protected. It meant she belonged to someone who would move mountains to keep her safe. Amara's throat tightened, a physical pain she couldn't suppress. She wanted to tell him to run. She wanted to scream that the mountains were about to fall on his head. Instead, she stood still as he stepped behind her. His fingers were cold against her skin as he moved her hair aside to fasten the clasp. The contact was electric, a bridge between two people who were already mourners of their own lives. He lingered there, his forehead resting against the back of her neck, a rare moment of complete surrender. "I know the shadows are closing in, Amara," he whispered. "I know Daejin is coming. I know the world is rotting. But tomorrow, after the gala, I want to take you away from the heights. No accord, no masks, just us." Amara looked at their reflection in the window. The emerald glittered at her throat like a green eye, judging her. She was a ghost wearing a dead woman's jewelry, preparing to lead the man who loved her into an ambush. She had set the timer. She had sold his soul to the federal government for a chance to win a war that suddenly felt very small and very cold. "Ji-hoon," she started, her voice breaking. She turned. In his arms, her hands finding the lapels of his shirt. For a second, the mission was 1,000 miles away. "Don't," he murmured, misinterpreting the grief in her eyes for fear. He kissed her then, a slow, desperate collision of two drowning souls. It tasted of whiskey, salt, and the inevitable. When he pulled away, he smiled. A genuine, heartbreaking expression that Amara realized she had never seen before. "Tomorrow," he promised. "Tomorrow," she echoed, her heart breaking under the weight of the emerald. The grand ballroom of the Glass Heights was a symphony of excess. Gold leaf, crystal flutes, and the low, predatory hum of the most powerful criminals in Asia. Amara moved through the crowd, the emerald pendant heavy against her chest, ticking like a detonator. She felt the tactical earpiece tucked deep in her canal vibrate. 3 short bursts. The feds were in the vents. They were in the service elevators. The countdown was at 0. Ji-hoon was at the center of the room, flanked by the territory lords. He looked every bit the Sky Prince, but his eyes kept drifting to Amara, searching for the woman who had kissed him in the dark. Beside him, Daejin Rourke sipped champagne, his gaze darting toward the exits with a sudden twitchy suspicion. "You look beautiful," Ji-hoon whispered as she reached his side. He took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "Goodbye, Ji-hoon," she breathed. Before he could ask why, the world turned white. The floor-to-ceiling windows didn't just break. They vaporized under the force of breaching charges. 3 flashbangs detonated in a synchronized scream of light and pressure. The ballroom, once a temple of elegance, descended into a primal vacuum of smoke and terror. High-intensity spotlights from hovering tactical helicopters cut through the haze, turning the dancers into frantic silhouettes. "Federal agents, get on the ground!" The command roared through the speakers, followed by the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of rapid-fire suppressors. In the chaos, Ji-hoon reached for his waist, his instincts as an heir screaming for survival. But a cold, familiar weight pressed into the center of his chest, stopping him dead. He blinked through the ringing in his ears, his vision clearing just enough to see her. Amara wasn't cowering. She was standing in a low, tactical stance, her midnight silk gown torn at the thigh to reveal a holster. Her hand was steady, her finger draped over the trigger of a Sig Sauer pointed directly at his heart. The warmth he had seen in her eyes the night before was gone. In its place was the hollow, grey steel of Vesper. "Amara," he gasped, the word lost in the roar of the ventilation system. "Hands where I can see them, Ji-hoon," she commanded. Her voice didn't waver, but the emerald at her throat pulsed with her racing heart. He didn't look at the tactical team swarming the room. He didn't look at Daejin being tackled into the marble. He looked only at her, at the woman he had invited into his soul, now standing over the wreckage of his empire. The betrayal wasn't a sharp pain. It was a slow, freezing realization. He didn't raise his hands to fight. He simply let them fall to his sides, his eyes filled with a quiet, devastating understanding. "You were never there," he whispered. "I was never there," she echoed, her voice a ghost of a lie. The safe house was a sterile box of white walls and humming fluorescent lights, located in a district of Seoul that didn't have a name. It was the kind of place designed to help people forget they existed. Amara sat on the edge of a narrow cot, still wearing the midnight silk gown, now stained with ash and the metallic scent of flashbangs. The emerald pendant sat on the bedside table, a cold green eye watching her from the dark. On the small television in the corner, the news cycle was a frantic blur of blue and red lights. The headlines scrolled across the bottom in a relentless loop. Hanul Accord dismantled. Sky Prince in federal custody. The footage showed the glass heights being swarmed, the elite of the underworld led out in plastic zip ties, their faces shielded from the cameras. There was a shot of Ji-hoon. He wasn't hiding. He walked toward the transport van with a terrifying, hollow dignity, his gaze fixed on nothing. He looked like a man who had already left his body behind. The door to the room opened and Calder Ross stepped in, carrying a manila envelope. He looked satisfied, the weariness in his eyes replaced by the glow of a successful harvest. "We got the ledger, the port manifests, and Rourke. The Accord is hemorrhaging. It's the biggest win in a decade, Amara. You're a ghost now. New name, new city, new life by Monday." He waited for her to smile, or perhaps to ask for a drink. She did neither. "He didn't fight back," she said, her voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. "He's smart. He knew the math," Ross shrugged, tossing the envelope onto the bed. "Don't get soft on the aftermath. You did. Your job. You saved the city from a cartel that was eating it alive." "I destroyed a man who was trying to find a way out," she whispered. Ross paused at the door, his silhouette sharp against the hallway light. "There is no out in that world, Vesper. You just provided the exit strategy." When the door clicked shut, the silence that rushed back into the room was deafening. It was a thick, heavy thing that pressed against her chest harder than the tactical gear ever had. She had won. She had mapped the veins of an empire and cut them open. She had fulfilled every line of her contract. Amara picked up the emerald pendant. The gold was still warm from her skin, but it felt like lead in her palm. She looked at her reflection in the darkened TV screen, a woman with a new life and no soul to put in it. In the heart of Seoul, the lights were still flickering. The city was still breathing, and the Accord would eventually be replaced by a new shadow. But for Amara, the performance was over. The curtain had fallen, and all that was left was the ghost of a girl who had forgotten how to be anything but a mask. "It's been a ride, honey." That's how the empire falls. Not with a bang, but with a quiet click of a lock.